Hi, welcome back to another episode of Shifting Gears with R6 Anna. It has been a while. I can't believe that it's been almost 2 years since I started this podcast. And the way I see it, it's almost like amnesia. For most of us, we were living life, everything was fine and dandy. We go to sleep and we wake up, and suddenly the world is completely different. And like it or not, for better or worse, here we are. And I'm happy to say I'm ready to get back at it. If you follow me on Instagram, you know I've been a little MIA there as well, just because as life was happening, I sort of got further and further away from it. But I really missed it. So I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to be picking up the pit stops again. And I'm not going to go into a big spiel again like I did on my first episode, but I do just want to say, as a reminder of what these pit stops are, they're not an influencer page. They're not about throwing out different sponsors that have paid for opinions. It's all about you guys, the riders, the followers, people who love the motorcycle world, the motorcycle community, and just want to enjoy it and share it, because that's what I'm all about. From the time that I started getting involved as an influencer, that was always the most important thing to me, was to be able to give other riders true feedback, real feedback, and just share a love for the sport. So again, the pit stops, I want to make sure everyone is clear, are not about me promoting anything. So if it comes across that way, I apologize, but trust me, that is not my mission here. My goal is all about just sharing awareness and having fun. So I'm really excited for this next pit stop because it's one that has really been very helpful to me and also very detrimental to me in my writing in a lot of ways. I'd call it a necessary evil for sure. So we are going to be talking about suspension. So for a lot of new writers, I feel like they know nothing about it. I thought it was so funny when I posted my prompt today that I got next to no responses, versus when I posted my other prompt, I had so many responses when we were talking about what's helping and hurting the motorcycle community. But then when I reach out to people and I ask about suspension, I get crickets. I thought that was funny. And it's truly a testament to falling down the rabbit hole with suspension. It's something that is foreign to some riders, well known to maybe the more experienced riders. There's a handful of really great tuners and suspension people that are out there to help, that have been in it for a long time. But it truly is a world of its own when it comes to motorcycle riding. So I definitely felt it was something that needed to be talked about. And I am happy to have my guest, who's actually my suspension tuner, Mr. Bobby Loo.
Hey,
Thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to do this. I know you're super busy lately, but
yeah.
I felt there was nobody more fitting than my own personal counselor, suspension tuner guy. So welcome and thank you.
Oh, no problem. Yeah,
So tell me yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I remember the first time I met you. Didn't really do much suspension. I mean, you tried fiddling with it, but yeah, that's kind of how we met. I approached you and told you I could help.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're definitely going to get into that whole thing, obviously my experience with it, but I want to first talk about who you are, your background, how you got interested in suspension, how did you get to where you are now, basically, and talk a little bit too about, your company and all that stuff.
Well, suspension has always been one of those passions for me. Even as a kid, when I was playing with remote control cars and playing Gran Turismo, one of the first things I would do was suspension because I could care less about tires, brakes, horsepower. I wanted the car to handle a certain way. And same goes for motorcycles. And I mean, over the years, wrenching on motorcycles and playing with, suspension on video games and remote control cars, I started getting into the motorcycle suspension world and mainly just tuning my own. And I kind of fell in love with it all over again. And it definitely is. It's one of those cheap and quick upgrades that you can do. And one of the best upgrades you can do to a sport bike is just getting your suspension dialed in. Um, So yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I
I've
mean
enjoyed it.
it's something that so few riders, I feel like in the beginning, don't even think about, or don't, I guess it's not even a consideration. Yeah, I know when I first started, it was like the last thing that I was really concerned about when I was on the street was what my suspension was doing. And I guess I don't know if it's just because when you're on the streets, you're rarely ever pushing the suspension as hard as you have to, or is it one of those things that most rider thinks that only advanced riders should do? I mean, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, most novices seem to think that, oh, I'm not fast enough to really need any suspension adjustment or suspension upgrades. I mean, when I was first learning how to street ride and I was riding in the canyons, I wasn't afraid to turn the clicker, so I would go completely to the left or completely to the right and see what it would do. And then I would be like, okay, that didn't feel good. Let's go this way. Oh, that didn't feel good, until I found a happy medium. I'm like, oh, the bike actually wants to steer for me. And I'm not even going fast. I'm just doing, some casual street riding. So, I mean, people are just a lot of people are just scared to touch it. And they also don't think that they need it at their level.
Right. Well, yeah, definitely what you said, scare. I feel like I definitely have PTSD dealing with my suspension. So like you said, how we met is because I wasn't really into it. I was racing and I had somebody that was kind of doing it, but I had never asked any questions about it. You pay a guy at the track to set up your suspension and you're like, great. And then you go ride and you don't know any better and you're thinking everything's cool. And then as I started to have some of my own issues with trying to get the bike to turn, like you said, to go where I wanted it to. And that's when my can of worms started to open for suspension. And I feel like I have PTSD from it. Like I said, I feel like you're a very brave soul. I think it takes a very special person to be interested in suspension. Getting to know you, I think you have the technical mind for it. Like you love all that stuff. But I think for some riders, it's too much. It's too overwhelming. And I don't want people to be scared of it, which is why I really wanted to talk about this subject in the first place. Is I don't think it's something to be scared of, but I know I personally have been scared of it. So I mean, what advice would you have for a new rider or somebody newly in suspension? Like, where do you even start? How do you do it?
Well, for a new rider, I mean, I just would just go for it. Just find a local suspension tuner in your area, and just hopefully they're reputable, and see the difference it makes. I mean, hopefully they do a good job and it feels good, and see if it actually makes you more comfortable and more confident on the bike, whether you're on the street or at the track. I mean, back in the day, I feel like the suspension was a little bit to be scared of. Like if you went too far this way, like the forks would not move, shock would not move. It seems like nowadays they've kind of set it up a little bit. How do you say it? Just a little bit softer, to the point where you can't really fuck yourself up going that way or going that way. It kind of, you got a smaller range to work with. That way you don't hurt yourself. You see what I'm saying?
Right. So it's less chance for error. But I mean, let's say if I'm just like the novice street rider, like where do I find you guys? Like where do you hang out? What do you do? Like literally from square one, how do we get more people to take an interest in messing with their suspension other than
Well,
track? I mean, obviously we'll talk about that, but
yeah, well, I mean, it all depends on the city you're at. I mean, I'm in Las Vegas, so if you come to Las Vegas, I'm here. A lot of the street riders come to me out here for suspension tuning. But the problem is with Las Vegas, we don't really have a whole lot of twisties. Unlike where I'm from, Los Angeles, we used to do like Malibu, Angeles Crest, and all those canyon roads up there. So it's kind of hard to find good suspension guys. They're kind of I think, a dying breed. Uh,
yes. Like I said,
I'm
it
definitely.
definitely takes a special person. It takes a special
I
person to
mean,
be
it's really not that difficult. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but it I do have a passion for it. That's for damn sure. I eat, sleep. I mean, that's all I think about on a daily basis is suspension, and how do I make Anna's suspension better than it already is. I'll look at valving, I'll look at the spring rates and tire pressures, and there's so much we can do to make the suspension work better for you.
Right. And like really that's what I've appreciated about you so much as my suspension guy is like when I'm out there riding or I'm on track, I don't even have to have you with me, right? You're literally a text away sometimes from me saying, "Hey Bobby, my bike is doing this. What do you recommend?" And I think that's so important to be able to have that sort of relationship with your suspension person because the way people want their bike to feel is a very personal thing. Like you can do a standard setup and say this is how the bike should be moving, but every rider kind of likes their bike to feel different. So I guess it kind of goes back to too, like we're talking about feel. And do you think that
Mm-hmm.
that's something that like every bike should feel a certain way, or do you let riders kind of have their own say on, I want my bike to feel this way, and then how do you achieve that?
Well, for me, I think feel comes down to confidence. How confidence inspiring is that front end? Can you feel what the tire is doing? Can you feel what the bike's doing? There are, like my bikes, for instance, all my bikes tend to feel similar because there's this feel, and it's hard to explain because it's really a mental thing, but there is kind of this feel that I want from all my motorcycles, regardless if it was my '05 636 that I used to have, my R6 that I used to have, now my '08 ZX6R, my R3, doesn't matter. There's a certain feel in the way it turns in, the way it transitions, everything. There's a certain
Right.
feel that I want. And it's hard for me to get the bike to feel a certain way for you when I'm not riding the bike. So there's a lot of questions I have to ask in order to get as close as possible to get that bike to feel the way I want it, but also the way you want it. And again, everybody has a different feel. Everybody has a different way of riding. So for the most part, a lot of my riders typically ride similar. There are a few riders that definitely have odd ways of riding, and it does take quite a bit to understand and how to communicate with them. But yeah, for the most part, um, figuring out that feel is just figuring out that confidence level.
Right.
Uh,
And I mean, yeah, you touched on such an important thing where you said where, it's a mental more than anything.
mhm.
Because that was my last experience with you is like we were going back and forth for quite some time, turning these dials. And I was just like, man, like I'm almost to the point where I want to just like knock this bike over and walk away because it's like it's messing with my head so much thinking about every little thing that the bike is doing. And eventually I was just like, you know what? Like, I'm going to take the last advice you gave me. I'm going to set it and I'm going to walk away and I'm just going to ride it. And that's like really like, at what point do you suggest like stop spinning the dials and just go spin some laps? Like, where do you feel like you recommend that to riders? Or do you ever?
Well, if it feels like you're really not making much improvement on the dials, on the clickers, that's a good time to just stop and just go spin some laps with someone and see if maybe it's your line through that corner. Because a lot of people are like, well, it's doing this in that corner. I'm like, well, don't tell me about that corner. How's every corner around the track? Because I don't want to dial something in for that specific corner. I want it to have, the same similar feel, or I want it to handle well in most corners. I mean, there are some sacrifice corners, but for the most part, I want it to handle very well everywhere. So, how is it
Right.
working everywhere? And if it's just that corner, maybe it's your line. Maybe go out
Rider
with someone and,
input.
and yeah,
Yeah.
and see if maybe there's a different line you can take. Maybe someone can show you a different way around that corner.
Right. Yeah, because it's, motorcycles don't make a mistake or don't have an issue in one turn. They're going to have it in every turn. So usually if it's in one turn, it's usually the rider, like some sort of input that they're doing. Like I know after my last right-sided low side, I on my every time I would take rights after that, I was putting a weird input into the bike because I was stressing from having gone down on that side. So
Right.
it's one of those things where yeah, maybe it's not the bike if you're talking about just that one turn. I mean, how often do you think that a rider should actually adjust their suspension though?
It depends. Like a lot of my setups work for a lot of different tracks with just minor like preload changes, which is basically essentially just fine tuning your geometry. There are some heavy braking tracks where you might need a little bit of more compression, but it's not like you're going to go and completely redesign the suspension for every track. I mean, for the most part, my customers, my racers, they run the same bike everywhere with minor changes, maybe at most a spring change somewhere, but for the most part, it's all fairly similar, just fine tuning for certain tracks. So you're not really changing it all that much, unless you're a street rider that doesn't like to service your suspension, and then at that point you get the viscosity of the oil changing drastically because of the old oil, and it's constantly getting thick or thinner depending on the ambient temperature.
Right. And like I said, there's actually a lot of factors too, which you opened my eyes up to. I mean, this last time that we were talking, I mean, you took it down from, what brand tire was I on, what pressures was I running, what tire gauge am I using? There's so
Yeah.
many factors. This is why I always say it's like falling down the rabbit hole, and why I get PTSD, because it's like it's almost too much information.
Yeah.
So I mean, do you feel like it's worth it to have like a one-on-one suspension tune guy to like help you at the track? And if so, how often?
Of course. I mean, I all my racers, I try to get them to come out to the track with me for private events as many times as possible, because making big changes at the track is, one, stressful, and two, a lot of racers don't like to make big changes because they don't want the bike to feel different from race to race, because they don't want it to feel foreign. It's not that I tell them, it's not that it's going to feel foreign. It might just feel a little bit different. You might have to take a lap to get used to it. And they really don't want to do that sometimes. But some riders really don't care. They're like, do it, go for it. I don't care. Let's go. So,
Yeah, I'm the other guy. I'm the other one that's like, don't touch anything.
right? I have
I'm
so
that
many
guy.
riders like that. And I'm like, come on. It's going to be a change, but give it a couple corners and you'll understand it. But yeah, I mean, it's nice to have one-on-one time because, uh, like for instance, I'm working with a guy named Eric Stahl right now. He's the Moto America King of the Baggers racer.
Mhm.
First time ever working with him, and he's definitely a talented racer. He's not quite at the level that we need him to be at. He's not like Tyler O'Hara fast or the Wyman fast. We're getting him there, but he has a motocross background. He's been racing forever, and he's definitely pretty quick. But he brought me a bike that was foreign to me, a Harley. I was like, I don't know what to do with this thing. But just working privately and one-on-one with him, every time we go to the track, we're not just changing clickers and turning preload, changing geometry. We're going inside the forks, going inside the shock, making valving changes, and for the better. So private stuff versus helping out 15 guys in one day, you'll definitely notice more value in your tuning and what you're getting, because I'm able to, or any suspension guy's able to pinpoint the flaws in the suspension that is holding you back. If you understand me.
Yeah, I mean, there really is like no better feeling than when everything is in sync and everything is in harmony, and you just throw your bike on that rail and you're just out there. Like for me, that's what it's all about. And that's why I love suspension adjustments, but I'm almost terrified to make them sometimes. But that's why, again, I appreciate you so much. I can't say it enough how many times that you've helped me, even just like you said, spinning the dials, and it didn't really get me anywhere other than, your patience and your understanding and your support of just saying like, hey, let's try this, let's try that. I mean, it's clear you're a very patient person, and I think that's part of what makes you
Yeah,
so
about that.
good at this, Bobby. I can't give you enough accolades for that.
Yeah.
So again, I appreciate it so much. I didn't really want to get into like super involved stuff. Like you've thrown out some of the terms, like preloads and compressions and springs and stuff like that.
Those are
I
very
didn't
big.
want, yeah, I didn't want this one to be so about that, but I definitely
Uh,
want to encourage followers, my followers, anybody that has questions, if you're okay with it, to like reach out to you maybe for questions that they may have about specific things.
Sure.
Because like I said, you're such a wealth of knowledge and such a great asset. So, I appreciate you so much. I appreciate you coming on my pit stop and kind of getting me back into it. You definitely amped me up to get out there and ride again. But I want, on all of my pit stops, I have this tradition of asking my guests 3 specific questions. So if you're okay with it, can I ask you those 3 questions?
Sure.
All right. So if you could pass along one piece of advice to other riders, what would it be?
Keep an open mind.
Yep.
Because a lot of people are set in certain ways that they don't realize those ways work, but there are ways to work even better. And that's what I've noticed in the years of me doing this. And I haven't been doing this for as long as a lot of other people, but I've gone their direction and then I found my direction, and my direction worked for me and for all my riders. So there's definitely a different direction, different way of thinking that works.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's what set you apart for me, for sure. All right. So next question. What's one thing moto related? So whether it's gear, an upgrade, a brand, accessory, whatever. What is one thing that you can't live without?
No, tires. Gotta have my sticky tires.
I thought you were going to say suspension, Bobby. I
I
thought for sure
mean,
that was going to be your answer.
I love suspension, but I mean, I can take a stock bike and do pretty well on a stock bike, and I'm kind of known for taking stock suspension and making it work pretty decent. So, yeah, I mean, suspension is definitely important, but tires is just as important.
Okay, see, and that could be a whole pit stop episode of its own too, is talking about tires. But we're just gonna let that one lie right there.
All right.
All right. And lastly, what is your favorite moto memory?
Oh, it's got to be Pikes Peak. Pikes Peak. I did Pikes Peak as a crew chief 3 years in a row, mainly on the electric bikes, on the zeros, and yeah, that was kind of an incredible 2 weeks. Each event was about 2 weeks, and it was just an incredible experience. From the traveling there to waking up at 2 in the morning to get up to the mountain and start riding at like 5, and we had to be done by 9 a.m. Um, eh, it's one that's it's very exciting, but it's also stressful. And the people that you meet, the riders that you get to help. The last couple of riders I got to help were Marcel Ernie, who's a very talented rider, and then Mark Miller, who's America's the fastest American at Isle of Man, and he literally just won the Mexican hill climb, whatever it was. I'm not sure what they called that, but he just won the hill climb in Mexico a couple weeks ago. But yeah, working with him was definitely a treat.
That's
Something I can't
awesome.
get.
Awesome. Well, that's wonderful. Well, Bobby, like I said, I can't thank you enough. You're a gem. You truly are. And thank you again. And for everyone listening, make sure to check out Bobby's IG. I'll put all that information down in the description for this. Questions, comments, like I said, suspension is definitely something that needs to be talked about more. And thank you so much, Bobby. And to everyone, let's just keep the rubber side down. Thanks.
Thank you.